Hi, welcome to my channel, Inks and Tomes. I'm Nat, and today I will be doing my first book review / book essay on none other than The Catcher in the Rye. Why hello there, fancy seeing you here. I've got wares if you've got coin. Now before getting around to reading this book, and this is the first time that I read this book, I had heard a lot of opinions of people about Holden Caulfield and the depressiveness that is this child, and I finally decided to see for myself what this boy is really like. A lot of you might not know, but I've never gone to an English-speaking high school, therefore I never had to interact with Salinger's work and write essays on it. I can see a lot of people already envying me, but I decided finally to form my own opinion about the work and see what it's about. So without further ado, this is going to be an essay / review of the book, so be warned, spoilers ahead, and hopefully it'll be helpful in reopening up the discussion surrounding Holden Caulfield and the depressive entity that he is, as well as maybe help somebody who has a book report due in the upcoming year. Let's get right into it. In short summary, The Catcher in the Rye is a book about our main protagonist, Holden Caulfield, who gets suspended from school 3 days early and decides to spend the time wandering around New York and getting into a lot of misadventures, most of which are through his own efforts. I'm not going to get into more detail because I'm pretty sure most people know what it's about, and I just want to get into the juicy bits, which are Holden Caulfield is
something.
To start, I hated this book. I did not understand until about 3/4 in why so many people related to Holden. I did not understand why this was lauded as a piece of literature that everybody has to read, and why did American high schools really fixate on having this in their curriculum when it honestly just seems like a whiny brat's teenage diary. And then I changed my tune. And I'm going to have to say that I really like The Catcher in the Rye. I don't like Holden, which might seem like a bit of a contradiction because the entire book is Holden, but hear me out. The fact that Holden is one of the most unreliable narrators in contemporary literature is amazing. A lot of people probably would have realized this a lot earlier, but for me, the moment I realized that Holden Caulfield had me wrapped around his little finger was when he was sitting at the train station and he was reading these articles. And the first one was something to do with, as he calls them, wrong hormones, which he goes on to say,
"Oh, this looks exactly like me."
Followed by an article about cancer, which he then goes and says,
"Well, I have cancer."
Now, it might seem his claim that he has cancer is the most obvious lie that he could possibly have, because the likelihood that he has cancer is very slim. Being a hypochondriac is not that unusual, especially in the state of mind that he was. But for me, it was actually the previous article, the one which talked about him having a disfigured face, what have you, due to these wrong hormones, as he said, which blatantly can't be true. He not only is able to go on a date with this absolutely stunning girl, Sally, but he's also quite popular in school and gets to hang out with a fairly few influential boys, which, let's be real, if they bullied James Castle, which is another character that shows up near the end in retelling, then if Holden was anything but good looking and normal, he would have been bullied off the face of the planet. So for me, this bit of the narration, where Holden slips up yet again and shows the fact that he is lying to the reader, puts everything that I had read previously under a different spotlight and makes the text a lot more interesting, as well as Holden a much more interesting character. Holden himself, if you haven't read the book, or if you have read the book, then you can definitely support me here. He is depressed. He definitely has a lot of issues going on here, and he is constantly a contradiction between child and adult. He thinks that everybody is a phony, yet he goes and does everything that these phonies do. So to me, Holden is the embodiment of walking the line between adulthood and childhood while having a lot of unresolved mental health issues. His brother's death definitely impacted Holden's worldview, and you can see just how much when his sister later on in the book tells him that he can't think of Allie as the only good thing in the world because Allie was gone, which is definitely, again, not healthy. So in summary, Holden is an unreliable narrator, and that is an extremely interesting take on literature because us as readers, we usually depend on the narrator to be reliable, on the narrator to tell us what they see in order for us to understand and to empathize with them, in order for us to understand the situation that they're in and understand their worldview. Instead, with Holden, we are suddenly thrust into the position of we don't know if we can trust him. We don't know if what he's telling us is true, or which parts of it are true. And that makes the book, in my opinion, extremely, extremely good. I think you could actually argue that the entire book in itself is all made up, because the last chapter is barely a page long, and Holden doesn't really go on to say anything about his life past those 3 days. He says that the psychoanalysts keep asking him if he's going to behave when he goes to school back in September, and if it's all going to be okay. But bear in mind, September is quite a long time away from where we are in the book. The book is around Christmas time, so that means he's going to be there for another 6-ish, 7-ish months, which is a long time. And on top of that, we understand that he is retelling the story for the sake of the psychoanalyst. And frankly, from the way he directly tells us that he's one good teller of tall tales, we don't know if he's even going to school next September. We don't know if these psychoanalysts are asking or if they're probing. We don't know if his brother really is there. We don't know if what he actually says is happening, especially with the last 2 lines of the book, which say, don't ever tell anybody anything. If you do, you start missing everybody. And to me, that's a very strange place to end on, considering he's going to be there only for a few months, or that he's going to see a lot of the people that he's spoken to, like Jane and Sally and his sister, etc. So could he potentially be in the psychiatric ward for longer than what he's saying? Is that really even a psychiatric ward? Is he even still in New York? I would think a normal person would be more interested in telling you about or exonerating themselves to you, in telling you about the future, in telling you about how, oh, everything is fine, everything is going to be okay, and this is how I'm going to prove this to you. Instead, Holden kind of holds his hands up and gives up in that case. So again, Holden is such an unreliable narrator that you really have to stop and think about every single thing that you read beforehand from a different perspective and say, is he really telling the truth? And if he is, what could it possibly be? I'm going to do a bit of a deviation here and say I do think there is a caveat in analyzing this text, and that is we do have to adhere to the 1950s worldview at that point. I've seen a lot of essays about the hidden rape of Holden Caulfield or the child molestation or autism of Holden Caulfield. And while I do think there's merit in discussing these kinds of views, I do think that this is more of imposing subtext into the text rather than drawing that subtext out of it, which I think both interpretations again hold their own merit, because that's what makes great literary works what they are. You can think about them in various contexts and draw out multiple interpretations at different points in time. I'm not going to discuss the book from the child molesting perspective, even though, truth be told, when I read it, I did get that kind of vibe from Mr. Antolini, and the fact that Holden mentioned how he knows this is what his teacher wanted because he's been around perverted situations quite a few times. I do think that was something that Salinger put in on purpose, but I do not want to comment on the depth of it until I give the book another read about a year down the line, because that is what I'm planning to do in order to have a more in-depth understanding of the text. So I'm just going to wrap it up here and come to my most important point, my final and most important point, which is the title of the book, The Catcher in the Rye. Now, for context, Holden is inside his parents' apartment talking to his younger sister Phoebe when she deduces the fact that Holden got suspended again. She asks him if he's interested in anything and if there's anything in his life that he would like to do to make himself happy. And Holden responds that he would like to be a catcher in the rye. He says that his ideal way of spending time is chasing children through a rye field, and preventing the children from falling down the cliff that the rye field is located on. Now, obviously such a job doesn't exist, therefore this is definitely a metaphor steeped with symbolism. And frankly, I understood it in two ways. The first is the most generic way. It's definitely Holden talking about protecting children from adulthood, and directly ties to the tragedy that he experienced with his younger brother. However, I have a different kind of interpretation, and I haven't come across this, and I don't know if this is in any way correct, but you know, I'm taking my creative license for what it is. I think that it's quite interesting that Holden pictures the rye field on top of a cliff. And later on in the book, we get retold the story of James Castle, his friend from one of the schools that supposedly commits suicide. And that Holden is taking a shower when he hears the awful sound of one of his classmates being propelled off the roof. We are not sure if this is murder or if this is suicide. I really question the relationship between James and Holden, considering that in the book Holden says that James isn't his friend whatsoever, and he's barely spoken to him. Yet Holden is super close to Mr. Antolini, who's the one to come and cover James with his coat and take the body away. But second of all, James borrows a turtleneck sweater off Holden, and Holden has absolutely no problems giving it to him because he was wearing, according to Holden, he was wearing that sweater when he died. But I find that really strange because that's a very personal thing to do to somebody that you have no relationship. So I think that Holden is lying to us about James, or how much he knew James, or what really happened to James, in my personal opinion. And that is something that I want to think about more in my second rereading of the book. And the last nota bene is that Salinger names his protagonist Holden Caulfield. Holden, from what I could find, means the hollow in the valley, and Caulfield is from Old English, which is cold field. And essentially Holden Caulfield is the hollow in the valley of a cold open field. And you can say what you will about me looking at symbolism, but I feel like a hollow in a valley usually means a comforting or a safe place. So Holden, once again, in and of himself, is trying to protect people who were in his position in a very childlike way. So that is my very brief analysis of The Catcher in the Rye. Did I like the book? Yes. Did I like Holden Caulfield? No whatsoever. I thought that he and his very pretentious way of narrating was a bit grating for the majority of the book, but looking back at what it was supposed to portray, then I think that it's really well done. Would I recommend this book? 100%. I think classics are classics for a reason, and I think that The Catcher in the Rye has a lot of subtext that you start picking out once you stop treating Holden as a normal protagonist of any other novel. Again, the fact that he is an unreliable narrator makes the book what it is, and makes the symbolism that Salinger put in all the more thought-provoking. Reading the book reminded me of the experience of being extremely tired and wandering around trying to get your bearings in an unfamiliar place, and being that kind of irritated and annoyed that you can't quite explain why, even though you understand that you're in a new location, and this location is actually really decent. I would love to hear your thoughts on this book, whether you read it and enjoyed it, whether you related to Holden in any way. When did you read this? Because I read this book in my mid to late 20s, whereas I realize a lot of people were exposed to it in their early to late teens, so that perspective shift definitely has an impact in perceiving the book. So yeah, I'd love to hear what you have to say about The Catcher in the Rye, whether you have read it, whether it's on your radar. What did you think of Holden? What did you think about the symbolism? Do you agree that Salinger put in as much symbolism as people are getting out of the book? Do you think that Salinger put in less symbolism and we just interpreted more symbolism into it? I'm actually on the second bandwagon, but I think I might save that rant for a more in-depth review, which I hope to do in about a year and a half. So thank you for watching this video. Do leave a comment about your current read and what your thoughts were on The Catcher in the Rye if you have read it, and I will see you in the next one.